It is a well-known truism that a city is known by its hotels. Strangers get their first and most lasting impression of a town from the treatment and accommodations accorded them at the place at which they stop when first coming into a new town. If they are dissatisfied with the hotel, they are quite apt to misjudge the entire community and leave with the prejudice which, as the lawyers say, it will take evidence to remove. Welcome to the Rediscover the Winds podcast, a podcast by the Fremont County Museums. With museums in Du Bois, Riverton, and Lander, the Fremont County Museum System is committed to collecting, preserving, and interpreting the stories of Fremont County and the Wind River area. The unique artifacts found at our museums relate the history of central Wyoming with information which, in many cases, can't be found anywhere else. With the Rediscover the Winds podcast, we hope to bring some of that history to you, wherever you are listening. Last episode, we looked at the Great Depression in Fremont County. We explored how New Deal programs and projects combated the financial crisis and how towns and roads were improved during this era. We also investigated the impact of those projects on tourism in Fremont County. This episode will continue with our theme of tourism and travel as we investigate the story of hotels in Riverton. Today, Riverton's Federal Boulevard has a variety of hotels and motels. They serve tourists passing through, people visiting family and friends, and host community events. Hotels back in the early days of Riverton fulfilled many of those same needs. Riverton was established as a town in 1906 after Shoshone Reservation lands were opened for white settlement. Pioneers were eager to take their chances homesteading, and there was an influx of people to the area. By 1908, Riverton was already home to 4 hotels. The Savage, also called the Grand Central for a time, was one of these early establishments. The hotel was operated by Mrs. Ella Savage, and many of Riverton's notable residents are said to have stayed at the Savage when it was first built, including Dr. Tonkin, J.J. Jewett, David and Roy Hayes, who opened Hayes General Store on Main Street, and Reverend John Roberts, who acted as an Episcopal missionary to the tribes on the Wind River Reservation. The Wyoming Inn and Wind River Hotel both opened in 1907. The Wind River Hotel was owned by Ed Luffy, who built it close to the Chicago Northwestern Railroad depot to garner business from people coming into town on the train. An advertisement for the hotel reads, quote, "First-class hotel, rates $2 and $2.50 per day, as good service as any hotel on the Northwestern Railroad." The hotel was sold in 1910 to John Lapierre, an immigrant from France. Lapierre left his home in the Alps for Wyoming after learning about the prospects available in the West. His fiancée stayed in France while he immigrated to Wyoming, first living in Rawlins and then moving to Riverton in 1907. By 1910, he had bought the hotel and made a trip to New York City to greet his fiancée, who had traveled to the United States from France. They got married in New York and then made their way to Riverton. More hotels began to spring up throughout the 1910s and 1920s to keep up with demand. These included the Rhodus Hotel in 1915, later called the Dorman, the Teton Hotel in 1919, and the Wyoming Hotel circa 1920. A newspaper article from the Riverton Ranger notes that the Wyoming Hotel provided low-cost rooms for new arrivals to the labor market. Riverton was a busy town in the early decades of the 1900s. People were homesteading, gas and oil fields were being developed, and irrigation projects needed workers. The addition of the railroad in 1906 made it even easier for people to get to Riverton, as the Chicago and Northwestern Railway built the line from Casper to Lander. These new industries and businesses brought people to Riverton, and some utilized hotels for housing as there were not enough homes available, especially when one of the alternatives was tents. During this period, John Lapierre, who bought the Wind River Hotel in 1910, had extensive remodeling done to the hotel in 1915. He moved the original building back on the lot and created a brick addition. The renovations were completed in 1916, and the hotel was renamed as the Lapierre. The renovation cost $40,000 in 1915, which equates to about $1.2 million in today's money. People had come to Riverton, and the hotel business was booming. The construction of the Teton in 1919 was directly connected to these trends and growth as well. Local businessmen desired a bigger and more genteel hotel for visitors and tourists. Jacob Astor Dellfelder, a very successful businessman in Riverton, initiated the push for building the hotel and got investors involved. The La Paillere, similarly, was gearing up to handle tourists. A Riverton Review article from 1915 states that the newly renovated La Paillere would, quote, provide greater facilities for accommodation of the greatly increasing traveling public. Hotel La Paillere will have no superior for its size in Wyoming. There will be 56 guest rooms, every one of them steam-heated with hot and cold water in every room. There will be private and public baths throughout the house, and everything possible to add to the comfort of the traveling public will be installed. These businessmen understood the financial opportunity that tourism afforded the town. Millions of dollars were coming through Rocky Mountain states as people learned about the incredible scenery in these locations. However, a Riverton Chronicle article from 1918 noted that Wyoming was somewhat losing out on this financial boost because of a lack of advertising around what Wyoming had to offer tourists, particularly those coming from the east. The article goes on to note that Colorado, by comparison, had done much better marketing itself and that people knew of the beauty of Estes Park and the scenery around Denver. The article decries that there are, quote, Eastern tourists stopping at Estes each year that do not know anything about the Tetons or the size of trout in Jackson Lake. But once roads were improved for motor tourists, and there were more advertisements and dissemination of information, tourism, and lots of it, did come to Wyoming. But that begs the question, why were tourists coming to Riverton specifically? The answer to that is much the same as today. Tourism to Yellowstone National Park, and later Grand Teton National Park, was, and continues to be, a major factor in people stopping in Riverton and utilizing its hotels. Newspapers even ran headlines like, quote, Riverton, the south entrance to Yellowstone Park, nature's wonders revealed to tourists via Du Bois and Jackson scenic routes. Another reads, quote, Wyoming is the natural gateway of the West. It is the gateway to Yellowstone Park, the greatest of all parks. Yellowstone, established in 1872, is the United States' first national park and considered to be the first national park in the world. It is both one of the largest national parks in the nation and one of the most popular. Riverton's proximity to Yellowstone brought more and more people to the town, and Riverton was seen as one of the last stops before entering the wilderness. In fact, a 1936 ad for the Teton Hotel reads, quote, The Teton Hotel, Riverton, Wyoming, the last stop at a real first-class hotel before reaching the mountains and dude ranches. Additionally, while the national park was arguably the largest draw for tourists, recreational activities like big game hunting also drove people to the west and Riverton. Hunting parties would often stop in town and store stock supplies that would be useful to the parties as they headed further out. It is important to note that Riverton's hotels were not simply places to stay, but exuded a level of luxury and refinement. The Teton and La Paillere were at the top of their game and still bursting at the seams in the 1920s. For example, a 1920 Riverton Review article states, quote, The La Paillere ranks high among the best hotels in the state. The Teton, similarly, was given quite the accolades, as the Riverton Chronicle wrote on the eve of its opening, quote, If the plans of the stockholders work out, the Hotel Teton will be heralded throughout the eastern states, as well as the western, as one of the most comfortable and attractive stopping places for tourist travel. The La Paillere was also known as a favored lodging spot for, quote, friends among the oil people and ranchers who have occasion to visit the city. Another group of visitors, tie hacks from Du Bois, also enjoyed the La Paillere. Tie hacks who cut railroad ties out of forests in the Du Bois area would travel down to Riverton with the tie drives. They were able to work their way down to Riverton and then spend some of their hard-earned cash in town. Another factor that made these establishments attractive to both tourists and locals alike were their dining rooms, cafes, and bars. When the Wind River Hotel changed over to the La Paillere, newspaper articles made sure to note that the quality of the dining room would not be impacted by the renovations and arguably made better by the increase of space. It was even marketed as the, quote, best hotel and table service west of Denver. The dining rooms and bars also became hubs of community activities. Societies and clubs would often host their meetings at these hotels. Community dinners and dances would also be held. In fact, a dance to benefit the Red Cross was held at the La Paillere in 1918 to help with the United States' war effort during World War I. Similarly, the Teton was said to be, quote, the most attractive place to meet your friends, the coolest place these hot days, and the magnificent big lobby with its comfortable leather furniture is an attraction to many besides guests. During Riverton's 50th anniversary in 1956, an article from the Riverton Ranger notes that the Teton, quote, has been and is today the center of activities in the community, both for the traveling public and local citizens. Most conventions make the Teton Hotel their headquarters. As such, the hotel has also hosted businessmen and professionals throughout the years. The Riverton Coal Company was even formed in the Rodis Hotel in 1917. Additionally, specialist doctors passing through town would utilize the hotels, not just as places to stay, but as a type of headquarters where people could call on them for their ailments. For example, in June 1919, an eye, ear, nose, and throat specialist was at the Rodis Hotel for 2 days. The newspaper ad reads, quote, Dr. George Smith will be prepared to do work in his special line, including the fitting of glasses. While the hotels served a variety of purposes in the community, local businessmen also saw them as a way to help market and develop the town while attracting more settlement. Ads from the Riverton Rural Development Agency showcased the artisanal water, natural gas for home heating, the railroad, hotels, stores, and sewers that the town had to offer. One of the ads called Riverton, quote, the ideal town in which to establish a home. Many of these marketing tactics were also used to try and attract investors, specifically to build housing in the town. One article notes all of the employment opportunities that Riverton had to offer, such as work in farming, at the oil refinery, shops, and at the railroad tie processing plant. Making Riverton seem like a land of opportunity and modernity would be key in getting people to invest in the development of the town. The 1920s also saw the rise of another kind of accommodation for tourists, the motel. Motels began to grow in popularity around the rise of the automobile and the expansion of highways. The word motel comes from the term motor hotel. As access to automobiles expanded in the 1920s, more and more people were jumping in their cars and exploring the United States. These tourists needed places to stay, and motels, like the expansion of hotels in Riverton, were born out of necessity. One of the early motels in the town was the Mountain View Motel, which opened in the mid-1930s, and is considered to be, quote, one of Riverton's pioneer tourist courts. By the 1950s, there were a number of motels in existence. These included the Mission, Corral, Lazy K, Circle W, and Heath Motor Court, all of which were located either on West Main Street or Federal Boulevard. Terms like tourist court and motor court were also used during the period to describe motels. Like today, motels had a few characteristic differences to hotels. Motels catered to motorists, people traveling via car. They were often designed so that parking spots were located directly outside of the doors to the rooms. Motels were often smaller than hotels, individually owned, and sometimes a cheaper option than a stay at one of Riverton's first-class hotels. Motels had their heyday in the 1960s, but due to the start of chain hotels that became common at highway interchanges, they declined in popularity over the following decades. Riverton has seen this rise of chain hotels with the Holiday Inn, Comfort Inn, and Hampton Inn now lining Federal Boulevard. The landscape of hotels in Riverton has changed and evolved over the years. From the early hotels near the train tracks to the expansion of accommodation for people coming to settle in the area, to tourists navigating their way to Yellowstone, Riverton's hotels have served a number of purposes for both tourists and locals alike. The hotels became active community spaces where societies and clubs would meet, elements could be seen to, dances would be had, and fine dining could be obtained. While some of the buildings still stand, the Lotbyer Hotel is now home to the Brown Sugar Coffee Roastery and Oak Haven Dental. The Teton has been converted into housing for seniors, while the Wyoming Community Bank occupies the first floor of the building. Despite these evolutions to the landscape, Riverton still receives many visitors passing through to the national parks, and guests continue to have their pick of a number of hotels and motels. That's it for this episode of the Rediscover the Winds podcast. Next episode will focus on hotels and Lander, as we continue with our theme of tourism and travel. Rediscover the Winds, a Wyoming history podcast, is brought to you in part by the Wind River Cultural Centers Foundation. The WRCCF is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Fremont County museums preserve our Wyoming and Wind River cultural and natural history by directly supporting the efforts of the Du Bois Museum, the Pioneer Museum in Lander, and the Riverton Museum. To learn more, visit www.windriverccf.com and help us conserve our past while enriching our present. Thank you.